Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Michael Arkey, and I'm the moderator for InfoTex. We are excited to be here again this year to present what we have gathered through 2022. So without further delay, this is the 2022 Technology Plan. With us today is our Senior Staff Auditor. He strives every day to ensure we, as well as our clients, are safe. You may have heard him read our guidance, summaries, or may have bumped into him at various conferences, workshops, and forums, as he has worked year-round to gather data for this talk. If not, it's my pleasure to introduce Adam Reynolds. Adam?
Well, hello, everyone, and thank you, Michael, for the introduction. For everyone who has watched one of our annual technology planning movies before, this is the first year Dan has not presented this, and we're also doing a live recording, something we haven't done in a number of years. But as Michael stated, my name is Adam Reynolds. I'm the Senior Staff Auditor here at InfoTex. So as mentioned, this is my first time presenting this material. I don't think I've done anything this long before either, and this being a live webinar is a first for me as well. So please bear with me if anything too bad happens, but fingers crossed everything goes well. And if we want something to go right, we need to plan. You know, I've ran through this a number of times before the actual presentation, and I'll probably say it again later, but if we fail to plan, plan to fail. Cliche, but it is what it is, and there's truth there. You know, on the opposite side, the best laid plans and such, things don't always go according to plan. But the first step for anything we typically do or want to accomplish is to plan for it. Yeah, that's common sense at this point in time. And so over the next hour or so, I've planned for about 55 minutes. We'll see where that lands, but I'll talk about technology planning in general and the use of our tactical plan alternative spreadsheet to accomplish that. Of course, you're welcome to use whatever method you have in place. Ours is a spreadsheet. But you'll want to make sure you're addressing the same material. It's a way to document, lay a paper trail as to how we go about deciding on what will be in our technology plan and what won't, which is also important to document. It should show the prioritization process, the basis for why things were included and not included. I'll also speak to the changes to technology planning from the release of guidance and the AIO booklet. Really a review of things we presented on in 2 movies last year in our annual technology planning. We spoke to its impact. And then we also had a dedicated movie on how the AIO impacts technology planning. I'll also explain the overall process in the prerequisites section, our approach that we think benefits or is more oriented towards smaller community-based institutions. While I'm not, going to say technology planning is or isn't complicated, that can depend on a number of things, but it's definitely an involved process. So we try to keep it simple while also making sure to include everything relevant, from what guidance expects to see to the necessary metrics for prioritization. And finally, a review of our tactical plan alternative spreadsheet to show how to use it. Hopefully by then I've explained the reasoning for why what's in there, but there are definitely columns in that spreadsheet that you don't have to use. And of course, feel free to put your own columns in there. We just really want to show you how to use it, as well as provide some ideas that you might want to consider for your own technology plan. And also show what documents are in the deliverables you can download with this webinar. But I really encourage everybody to watch this in its entirety, especially if you haven't watched one of our movies like this before. Something I'm going to do differently than previous years. One of the big sections of this technology planning movie is where we present how guidance has impacted the technology plan over the last year. Not from the perspective of how it's changed the process, but things that would impact what would go into the plan itself. In our spreadsheet, there would be line items, the tactical plan alternatives, to address specific things from guidance changes in the last year, things we would want to implement to address guidance. And I'll also discuss sources of items for the tactical plan and things like that later. But this movie will be kind of ordered by how long it has been since the material has changed. But that spreadsheet is included in the downloads for this webinar. And if you don't understand anything in it or have any questions about technology planning, shoot us an email. Technology planning is a continuous process. And we're getting and evaluating ideas throughout the year. So, if you have any ideas, let us know as well. But I really hope throughout the year you're documenting those. That's a key step to this. But the plan itself is typically done annually. So I'd recommend watching this movie, again, especially if you haven't seen one of our videos before, just to refamiliarize yourself with the process and concepts again. It's a good start before actually diving into the plan itself. But the idea here will be to present on what guidance may have impacted our technology plan in the last year, how the AIO booklet impacted the technology planning process when it was published last year, what that guidance wants to see, because it's still probably the guidance that has the most impact on what goes into our technology plan this year. So those two items will be first. So I'll be referencing one of our original 2016 movies about technology planning. And know that while the material hasn't changed much, we could really update its presentation and tie it together with the Architecture, Infrastructure, and Operations booklet. So I would normally recommend watching that movie here, but we're trying to update that in the next month or two, December, January timeframe. So I think you can hold off on watching that one and wait for the new one when it comes out, and we'll let you know. But that old movie really shows what guidance has to say on technology planning, what expected documents and materials should be coming out of that process, really, why and how. Things that I'll review today at a high level, but it also explains how it's more than that. That technology planning is more of a journey than a process, and what that journey really entails. And then finally, we show the 2023 Tactical Plan Alternatives spreadsheet at the end. What has changed since last year and the overall approach to our technology planning process. The approach we think is useful to community-based institutions on how to go about gathering and analyzing tactical plan ideas and technology planning in general. So again, I know many people here today have seen our movies before, so I wanted to switch it up a little bit and present the most timely information. And also make that note that we will be updating our technology planning movie from 2016 in the next couple of months. So watch out for that. So as mentioned first, I wanted to review the guidance, rules, etc., things that have been published in the last year that may have impact on technology planning. And this, of course, won't be an all-inclusive list, but it really just kind of goes over what's changed in some guidance that may impact our technology plan. The AIO was the biggest thing recently, but that was over a year now, and we'll speak to that separately after this. But the first item we have in here, the updated FFIEC Cybersecurity Resource Guide for Financial Institutions. This was published at the beginning of October. The FFIEC updated its October 2018 Cybersecurity Resource Guide for Financial Institutions. And the purpose of that guide is to really help financial institutions meet their security control objectives and prepare to respond to cyber incidents. It also includes ransomware-specific resources to address the ongoing threat of ransomware incidents. But it's just 15 pages long, and it gives good resources and recommendations on things like information sharing and reporting, different kinds of assessments that may be relevant to you, as well as resources on exercises such as the CISA Tabletop Exercise Package, FDIC Cyber Challenge, and then the Financial Sector Cyber Exercise Template. So that's something that you want to review. It's not a guidance or anything that requires a response itself. It's not asking us to implement anything, but it's a good example on the source of ideas for the tactical plan. So see if there's anything you can pick up from it. And there may be some ideas for your technology in there, implementing a new ransomware control or something like that. The second item is the Computer Security Incident Notification Final Rule. I'll keep this one brief. I'm guessing everybody has probably already addressed this, but things slip past us sometimes. If you're not familiar with it, I'd be looking into this as soon as possible. But FDIC supervised banks are now required to notify the FDIC as soon as possible and no later than 36 hours after the banking organization determines that a notification incident has occurred. And they spell out, of course, what a notification event is in that rule, provide some examples. And this is referred to as the 36-hour rule. It required an update to our incident response plan and or business continuity plan. Really just to put the language in there so that if an event does occur, we know we are required to report it. The third item, the Consumer Financial Protection Circular from 2022. The circular doesn't suggest any particular security practices are specifically required under the Consumer Financial Protection Act. However, it does note some examples where the failure to implement particular data security measures, might increase the risk that there is liability under the Consumer Financial Protection Act. And it specifically speaks to multi-factor authentication, password management, and timely software updates. Something that should already be in place, but it's something that's good to review, more from a standpoint of, are we checking these boxes already, than something that probably needs implemented in our technology plan. And I included this because, as the first item, it's not something FFIEC is, saying, go do this, but an example of a source kind of outside guidance where we want to make sure, we're doing these things, looking at them, and if not, thinking, should we be addressing them in our technology plan? Vendor management to the next level and information security to the next level. These are both included in here from an awareness perspective. They are two new booklets or updates to booklets that we expect to see in the near future. And I'm sure I'm going to say this later as well, but we want to get out ahead of new guidances, not necessarily to start working on them right away, but so that we can plan and prioritize so that when, and if there's anything to implement, it's easier. And we've, kind of pre-planned for it. Something we discussed when the AIO booklet came out as well, really a running theme for guidance and publications. But, keep your ear to the ground for those. Those updates are coming, and it's something you're going to need to respond to. And then finally, this last item is more of a placeholder for your specific tactical plan. But in the spreadsheet, we have a line item, respond to 2022 audit and exam findings. And this is where you would address findings from audits, exams, or even possibly internal reviews of things that should be addressed in the technology plan. How are we going to address a particular finding or recommendation? What are we going to do what are we going to implement, to address that? And then prioritize those into the tactical plan alternatives. So you can show the priority of findings mitigation, next to everything else. Obviously, responding to findings takes a higher priority than other things. And so now for the biggest change to technology plan we've had recently in the last couple of years. It definitely introduced a number of things that could go into the tactical plan as well. But the biggest change in technology planning, assuming you interpreted the guidance the way we did, was your reaction to the new AIO policy, which was your first architecture plan. Architecture, infrastructure, and operations was big, insofar as its size, at least. It was 164 pages. And Dan presented this technology planning movie last year called Technology Planning in Your First Architecture Plan, which included, as you can guess, how the AIO guidance, specifically the architecture plan, fits in the technology planning process. But we also released a movie in October of last year, the AIO's Impact on Technology Planning, which included a good panel discussion. I'd recommend you watch that if you want more details about how the AIO impacted technology planning. But I'll give a brief overview here. And, one thing mentioned last year is we weren't sure what was going to be examined against exactly. And a lot of the information, in the booklet, wasn't specifically new. The FFIEC even stated that, in the guidance, but they've really always said that evolving technologies should be a part of the plan. But it expanded and provided details as to what technology planning should include, things like cloud computing and zero trust. Just to mention a couple of things we've seen a renewed focus on, at least with some of our clients in their exams. And that would be project management, wanting a good documented approach, and as well as change management. Making sure there is a controlled process for approving, introducing, and rolling back, if need be, changes to software and hardware. But also end-of-life planning for hardware and software, including detailed inventories of those assets, and IT budgeting, who's involved and what does that process look like. But I'll speak to those a little bit later. But even though we didn't know what exactly was to come out of the new booklet then, we encouraged people to get out in front of it. Take your time, but read it. Think about it, introduce it to the team and discuss it. Talk about it with other banks or at conferences, be aware of it, where, and what your response to it, might be, in regards to your tactical plan, get it in there as a strategy statement to address the new guidance. But now we're, a year later after that. But the AIO booklet replaced the operations booklet, obviously now including architecture and infrastructure and planning of those. But there were two main deliverables that came from the guidance, starting with the policy. And even the smallest of banks should have a policy, really, and an architecture plan. I don't think there's any way around that still. And there were also a lot more specific expectations that were new. I mentioned a number of these earlier that we've seen examiners drilling down on. And everything on this list is something we should have already, had in place by now. But this spells it out in more detail. Solid written expectations as to how to address these items. And last year, I think we also mentioned, or saw a renewed focus by examiners on segregation or separation of duties, something that is definitely not new to a bank. But we want to ensure we're doing this at the IT level as well. And we were happy to see that. It's something we've talked about at Infotex for a long time, and it's one of the reasons we kind of became an MSSP. We watch networks. We provide that separation from your team. We watch the network. They are responsible for implementation and changes. And of course, I'm not trying to plug our own services here, but that's the role of any third party watching your network. But there needs to be that separation between those that watch and monitor a process or whatever, and those that can make changes to that process. There were also some new things that seemed a little scary that smaller banks, aren't going to have to adopt, we feel. Operation level service agreements, but some things that we think will probably, eventually come down the road for smaller community-based banks, such as authorization boundaries. So you should be aware of them from the perspective of what's in the booklet, but not worry about them at least for now. It's something that, we expect to implement maybe down in the future. And that really gets me to this point, that in the architecture, infrastructure, and operations, they do make exceptions in the booklet for smaller or less complex entities. And when this first came out, we thought we might be able to put language addressing this guidance, perhaps a paragraph or two into an existing policy to address it. But really, after going through everything, we decided it was best to have a separate document for architecture, infrastructure, and operations. And we have an example of that policy in the deliverables. I'll go over that a little bit later. But there is a standard policy language as well as a one-page policy version. The one-page policy version really condenses the language of the policy down. It's the simpler version of the language. If you want more information, because I'm just reviewing this, go back to our movie on how AIO impacts technology planning. And last year's technology planning movie, the last section of it is about the architecture plan. So I brought up the architecture, infrastructure, and operations booklet mainly to say it should still be having an impact on your technology plan. The items in it, the technologies discussed in that guidance, the creation of the architecture plan, that has a pretty similar process to technology planning, a little different, and we talk about that in those movies. So maybe you're working on them at the same time, but this is a great example of guidance that will create tactical items for our technology plan. And this is the guidance, we're still responding to in our plan. So now we're moving into the middle section here, prerequisites. And I'm going to discuss what is required for technology planning. Again, the prerequisites, and also the deliverables we have as part of this webinar. Some guidance documents related to technology planning is what those deliverables will be. Really what the FFIEC, wants to say, or see, sorry. We also have an audit checklist of the technology planning process, and of course, the tactical planning alternative spreadsheet and past ones, which I'll be going over in more detail in that last section, as well as a few documents related to the architecture, infrastructure, and operations. If you haven't implemented your architecture plan yet, or want to see what we have to say about it, I'm also going to speak about, why we're doing this. Compliance, of course. We need to make sure we're hitting those bases, but also because of strategic risk. We have to plan for technology. I don't really think there's any question about that these days. So prerequisites, and let me explain what I mean by that. This is, of course, my first time presenting this material, but we've been presenting annual technology planning webinars since about 2014. And after a couple of years of doing that in 2016, the material and processes presented was really the same over just those couple of years. And it still didn't change much until the AIO guidance in 2022. And, that was more of what documents they want to see, that architecture plan, but not really change in how we plan, really, But also in 2017, we supplemented the material with what's new in technology planning from various sources, guidances, conferences, what we've been seeing and hearing. So if you're watching any of our past videos, you probably have the basics down, but if you don't, or just want a refresher, because again, technology planning can be a confusing process sometimes. Wait for that new update to the 2016 movie and watch that when it comes out. So the first prerequisite is really just, to understand the need to plan. And again, I think we all know that. I feel that's why everybody is watching this. They understand that, if we fail a plan, as they say, plan to fail. So this prerequisite section is really about how to plan the plan, how we arrive at the items that are in our plans, but also why we didn't include others. It's the paper trail for auditors and examiners, the process, the sources, risk ranking and balancing our resources, to achieve really the most benefit, while keeping risk in check and managing our expectations. And let me expand a little bit on the paper trail, because yes, it's for external parties to review and see how we go about technology planning, but it's also for ourselves, for the planning team and management that prioritizes what the technology team does, because we want the ability to say, we considered a specific item, but it wasn't prioritized based off of this, that, or the other thing. It helps us stick to the plan, when management might be trying to push for more stuff, to be included in the plan throughout the year. So here's the link to that technology planning from movie 2016. Again, the next one will probably be a link to planning 2023. I said December, January timeframe earlier, but I know, honestly, December is almost already here. So I think that'll be more of a January goal. But once that's out, watch that at your leisure. I'm sure there'll be more pressing things to address when it does come out. But if you're having trouble falling asleep one night, just remember that link, and start the video. Probably won't make it all the way through that night, but hey, maybe you'll wake up and it'll be on your mind and you'll want to finish it out. But that movie's a little less than an hour. And again, we'll be updating it. But one of the big points made in that movie is really that it's a journey. It's really more than a process. And that goes back to a book, The Universal Traveler. So if you want to understand what I'm talking about there, watch that movie. But a quick summary of it. Again, the movie is set with the theme of the book, The Universal Traveler, and it describes a design process, goes over the who, what, where, when aspects of planning, the top-down and bottom-up approaches, guidance, policy, and procedure in great detail, and then the use of tactical plan alternatives to lay that paper trail again, the documents that show the decision-making process in your technology plan. And going to, the who, what, when, etc. One of the first questions after getting, idea is typically when. When should a particular item be implemented? Is it something that's really important, or is it more just kind of like a pipe dream? But besides when we want to actually implement that item, with this being a technology plan, it's also important to understand when that technology is in its life cycle and how that impacts our planning. This is an old graph, Everett Rogers, Diffusion of Innovation, 1962. Maybe the slopes have changed a bit over the years, but the basic idea and concepts, still definitely hold true. And it goes kind of without saying. But we want to remind, the management team that when we have to adopt new technologies or implement new infrastructure, that if you're adopting this early in its life cycle, the costs and problems you run into are much higher than if we wait, for say half the market to invest in it first. We're going to end up with technology that is going to be a lot less problematic, both in terms of cost and time spent integrating and fixing issues as they arise. And also safer from a security perspective. So this is something to remind the management team of, when you're going through the annual planning process. The movie also talks about the top-down and bottom-up approach. Sources of ideas that go into the tactical plan. Two kind of opposite ways that technology plan ideas get incorporated into the plan. Our plan, of course, has to be aligned with the business plan of the bank. Support operations and plan for contingencies, so that's one source there at the top. Another is from audit and exam findings. And just to mention, you're going to have audit findings that end up in your tech plan, whether you agree with them or not. Or I guess I should say, whether you think they are high enough priority is probably a better way of saying that. Because most of us agree with the findings themselves in a report. They are present. Where there can be disagreement is, whether they're higher priority than another item in the plan that's already there. And whether we agree with everything that's actually in the finding. But of course we need to analyze it, see where it fits into the priority list. But we're going to need to introduce things into the plan, based on findings, from reports to address them. And then of course, new guidance, which I talked about before, how the regulatory landscape has changed. Again, last year, the Architecture, Infrastructure, and Operations booklet did have an impact on technology planning. It wants to see an architecture plan. It also introduced zero trust. Not that it was a new concept, but something I don't think would have been on smaller community-based institutions' radar for a few more years at least. And the AIO in general requires a big push, but it really showed the top-down nature of technology plan from guidance. So that would be top-down. The bottom-up approach would be, the ideas or suggestions our team members get over the years from different sources. Those sources could be from customers. If we're seeing a lot of adoption and usage of online services, we might want to consider expanding what we offer to customers online. It could come from frontline employees, something to address a particular need they could be seeing, or from conferences or talks. So there are really a lot of different sources that ideas for the technology plan could come from. And a member of management might go to a conference and come back with ideas they think are amazing and want implemented as soon as possible. And it may be a great idea, but the planning process is in place for a reason. Everything still needs a risk assessment, and the planning guidance and policies and procedures really, help arm the information security officer kind of with like a big stop sign. That's sometimes how, management sees us, as a barrier. But we need to slow the process of adoption down and make sure we're thinking through it properly. And to finish the list out, ideas can also come from talks with other banks and seeing what the competition is doing as well, making sure you're staying competitive in certain areas. But the three takeaways from that movie is that technology planning is an awareness process, that helps manage strategic risk, and align our plans, what we're actually doing with the business plan of the bank. And going back to the idea that it's a journey, from the universal traveler, it lays out a 7-step process for that journey, defining the problem, analyzing it, and it's really about problem solving. Again, that's kind of what technology planning really is. And then it establishes 3 lists that we want to see as part of our technology plan. Those lists are also included in the deliverables. We have examples of those, but they are pretty simple. A paragraph or so on the vision statement, something that's not going to change much, if at all, over the lifespan of the bank. And it can change, of course, but, we'd want to see typically something like 2 to 4 statements in it that covers, the bank's vision for technology planning. Then below that, strategy statements, which will be things like, which will be things that'll typically take, a year or more. As you can see, they sit in the middle. Strategy statements basically attempt to implement an overall goal that supports the vision and then can be carried out by specific tactical plans. But we normally want to see a good, 5 to maybe 8 items there. And a good example of this would be zero trust. Something that could take a good number of years to actually implement. It would require specific tactical items to be addressed, changes to applications in the infrastructure, and be in line with the vision statement of keeping information secure. And then, of course, the tactical plan, would include a good number more items. It's something we still want to keep to a high level so that everyone who might be involved in planning can understand. In some years, depending on how our exams and audits go, if there are any big strategies that require a lot of tactical work or just changes to guidance, you can easily break 30, 35 tactical statements in the plan. It's the list that we typically have to exclude items from, but we want to limit that. If you can keep it to under 25, it makes it more manageable because we don't want to commit to more work that can be done. Resources are always limited, but then, we need to ensure we're prioritizing correctly, and that's exactly what the tactical plan alternatives spreadsheet addresses. It's the paper trail and reasoning behind what is, in our plans and what isn't. So having talked about that, we move on to the nature of why. You know, don't get me wrong. Compliance is one of the reasons things get into our plans, and compliance, it's a good reason. And a lot of the times it's due to new guidance that we need to address, and there is a reason to do that. Not only does it get the auditors and examiners off our backs, but it's normally to address a particular concern regulators and examiners want addressed. That's why guidance is being published. So there is compliance risk, and that's the main driver behind some items going into the technology plan. But those don't really address true security risk. They can, but it's normally to address a broader risk across institutions than something that addresses a specific security risk or concern at your institution. But technology planning, isn't just about compliance. Many people think this process is really for compliance, and it's not. It's about strategic risk, and it leads to security risk. But really this goes right back to one of the first things I said in this movie, that we need to plan. Not planning leads to failure. Technology is, kind of to put it simply, complicated. And we need to plan strategically to make sure our technology is supporting operations now and in the future. And I don't really think anyone's going to disagree with that, at this point in time. So our planning needs to address strategic risk, but that can create some financial risk, as technology can be expensive. And there can be some operational risk as technology changes as well. I'm sure we all have at least a story or two on how an upgrade or a replacement technology we were putting in didn't go as planned and had some negative consequences on operations. But most importantly, it creates security risk, especially if we're not making sure we're checking all of our bases before rolling out a new technology. If there's not a plan, that the technology has to be a part of, well, that can introduce things, that we call, shadow IT or rogue devices, applications or even hardware that no one knows about except, for maybe a single employee sometimes. So that's why we want to go about a specific planning process for this. And the cloud is a good example of this. In this instance, I'm going to use the cloud and define it as an application that used to be run locally, but now is out there on the internet. And employees have to sign in with the username and password or some other authentication method. And cloud resources can be very advantageous. You don't have to support the application, store the data. You have to manage more from the vendor management side than IT. And those services can be very secure, given the right circumstances. But migrating to the cloud, presents some unique risks that really need to be addressed from a security standpoint. And it's not as simple as a traditional vendor in understanding, the security there, looking through SOC 2 reports and such. But it's also the controls that your institution needs to implement and configure correctly to ensure the vendor's controls are working properly. We need to make sure that any technology goes through the proper channels before being implemented. A well-meaning management team member should not be able to introduce, this great new program that will simplify this or that process with all of, without all of its, risk being understood, and as well as prioritizing it against what is already in the technology plan. So now that, I'd say we all agree that it's more than compliance, we still need to satisfy those compliance requirements though. So I'm going to point out, that included in the deliverables from this presentation is a document we call our FFIEC guidance summaries. Basically everything we could find that spoke to technology planning process by the FFIEC, which was last updated in 2019. And again, guidance about the overall technology planning, really hasn't changed much since 2017. But I'll show you where that file is a little bit later in the deliverables. So we wanted to reduce the guidance down to the minimum, what was really required to meet the guidance out there. And then with that, made a 9-point audit checklist. The requirements are in the policy language that are in the deliverable section, but I want to go over what the guidance says, just to show what requirements we are satisfying, and how those are being met. But to simplify it, planning is preparing for new products, new services, mergers and acquisitions, and also including sunsetting IT services. What the architecture, infrastructure, and operations speaks to in the end of life planning section in that guidance. It's also to ensure that IT resources are working with the business side to support them and plan together. So this is kind of how the FFIEC is really defining technology planning here. And when they say IT resources, it's more than just the traditional hardware and software. Well, I say traditional, but is that even true now? IT touches almost every aspect of businesses these days. So that's not new. But here's the list from what the FFIEC has to say about it. It's the infrastructure, including power and telecommunications, obviously hardware, but there's so many more different kinds of devices and applications now being supported by IT. Operating and application software, and it also includes personnel, include both the staff and the training programs as well, training of the IT personnel, but also training of employees on the operating systems, applications, email, etc. And so this is directly out of the guidance. Well, not simplified to this bullet or to these bullet points, of course, but planning requires management involvement. And they actually suggested the use of the IT steering committee to develop your technology plan. So we mentioned management needs involved. So what does that mean? Let's mention that this process should constantly be adjusting. Coming up with a new technology plan is something we do on an annual basis, considering a broad range of alternative ideas and sources of ideas once a year to come up with a formal technology plan. But we need to be reviewing that more often. It can change much more frequently than annually, if risks come up that need addressed with some urgency. So the technology plan should be addressed, we feel at a minimum quarterly, again, with the IT steering committee, if they are responsible for its creation as well. But to get status on items, ask questions, address items that, may arise, really to manage it. But IT themselves should be, of course, looking at, that plan much more frequently than quarterly, at least monthly, because they're the ones who are going to be, working through to implement the items in the tactical plan. So what does the plan need to specifically address? The FFIEC tells us to address long-term business goals, have a strategic level and a tactical level. There is, of course, no specific time, that separates or differentiates tactical from strategic planning. But strategic planning will typically be, multi-year items. Items like infrastructure can take 5 years. Changes to operations, big architectural changes, zero trust. But then there, might be items, let's say 3 years that, and that's a time frame that you can provide trends, over the years. Good time frame to think about, making sure we're aligning our strategic plan to our business plan. But if your bank has a 5-year business plan, obviously, your technology planning should probably go out 5 years as well. That would make more sense for you. But most banks we're aware of are really focused on the next 3 years or so. A little bit out more for more complex strategic plans. But there are also, of course, the more immediate annual plans, the tactical plans, what's going to happen in the next year or so. And it spells out, or the tactical plans really spell out in more detail, how things would be accomplished. The strategic items are more high-level concepts or ideas, while the tactical items would be specific ways to accomplish those ideas, such as implementing a new application or network device, to support a new security service. It can spell out the resources and steps required. The FFIEC also suggests an operational plan, which larger banks should definitely be doing. Typically, the larger your organization, the more people will be in IT. There will be less communications between teams and individuals than you would see in a smaller, community-based bank, where a handful of people are really responsible, for IT in general and speak regularly. So larger institutions should have a more defined plan as to how they go about going to, implement each tactic, and that's through the operational IT plan. We don't think this is needed for smaller banks, though. It's important, look into what the guidance recommends think about how you would, implement a tactical plan, at a high level. There might be something that could be useful to you at your institution, but in general, it's overkill. And we recommend focusing on the architecture plan, or elsewhere instead. If you have all the time in the world, sure, go for it. But that's, there's more important things out there most likely. But there's one big caveat here. If your bank's OCC, the OCC may disagree with this. They put it right into their interpretation of the FFIEC guidance that, this does apply to smaller banks too. But what we want to do, basically is to align our technology, strategy with the business plan. And then the tactical plan should be aligned, of course, with the IT strategy plan below it. And then the tactical plan, and the operations plan, if there is one. We do have a movie on this topic for the operational plan. It's actually our change management movie, where we talk about taking a tactical plan and turning that into an operational plan, and managing how the tactical plan is achieved through the method of documenting changes and making sure that we're managing the risk, as it arises. So here's that link if you want more information on that. But there's a lot of factors to consider for technology planning. These top ones are focused on things that might be from our business plan, but these are the items that the FFIEC mentions. So we just kind of wanted to show them to remind you. Definitely, there's, absolutely, there are more factors, but, just don't forget to, remind yourself of these ideas, see how they would be incorporated. If there's anything, that needs to go into your technology plan to address them. And then we have the audit checklist, which is in the deliverables, which is basically a checklist of what should be included in technology planning. I think I mentioned this before, but we reduced the guidance down to about 9 different audit questions. Here are the first 2 that really summarize what you need to have, in your technology planning process. And this goes back to the IT work program that the information security program booklet has at the end of it. I'm not going to review those. They are in the deliverable. And if you watch that 2016 movie, we'll go into more detail then. So let me just show you where that is now. In our deliverables folder, there it is, in the strategic plan, we have that audit checklist right there. And again, it's fairly simple, if we can pull it up, but it's exactly those 9 items that I just, showed in the presentation. So take this, go down the list and answer the questions based on your existing policy, procedure, and processes. As you can see, the questions are here. The risk rankings here are kind of very generic. They definitely don't represent the risk at your specific institution. Well, they might by chance, but no one specific bank was considered when we created this. But you want to think of the risk these items pose. But honestly, with only 9 items in here, risk is a great way to prioritize items, and we'll have to think about the risk, which I'll talk about here in a minute. But first, I'd go through this list and see what you can say is already being satisfied. Then risk rank what's left, to see if anything's a risk warrants further discussion or implementation. Those are the items that you should do something about, the gaps. And the risk ranking really, helps prioritize if there are multiple items in there. But also, as I mentioned, go back for those items that, we're already saying we're doing. Risk rank those too. It doesn't have to follow, our process, but think of it as, maybe low, moderate, or high risk and, where it would fit in with your scale and process. But even the things we are able to, say yes to, we want to risk rank those because those items, are addressing an actual risk. Because if it's something that does pose a real risk, we should then be monitoring that control to make sure it stays in place over time. But not everything needs to be addressed. There might be a good reason you're not doing it as guidance states. You're already laying a paper trail that, you're trying to meet compliance. You're aware of, what you should be doing and have reasons for things that you may not be doing. So now I'd like to spend a little time explaining what the deliverables are for today's presentation. Obviously, I just went over that audit checklist. But as part of this webinar, we provide a number of documents as deliverables, and they are located there, my.infotex.com/November 2022. But this is what you're going to find in the tactical plan folder. It has well, first, let me start in the root folder. First, we have the tactical plan alternatives here in the root, and this is the one from this year. As well as in the tactical plan alternatives folder, we have the tactical plan alternatives from the last 5 years here. And going back to Roger Everett's chart, if you're a late majority adopter or even a laggard, it can be useful to go back a couple years, in these tactical plans, look through them. 2018, 2019, might be some good ideas still in there. In the strategic plan, at the top here is our guidance summary of what the FFIEC has to say about technology plan that I kind of spoke to earlier. We have all the policy language from the FFIEC, condensed into one document, that guidance summary. This language hasn't changed much, but what's in it is basically what your IT governance policy or your information security program or some document, should spell out what happens in tactical and technology planning. Also in that folder, we have example IT strategy and tactical plans, things that would be good. Now that I'm thinking about it, those things I think would be great to update with that 2016 movie as well. So I think I'm going to add that to the list. And then the last folder, the architecture plan folder, of course, this is related to architecture planning, the AIO guidance. I believe that I've mentioned, some of the items in here, but these are boilerplate versions of the policies and procedures, we talked about a little bit, and some other resources. So, if you haven't implemented your own architecture plan yet, look through these documents, watch our movies. If you have any questions, let us know. We're here to help. But that was the prerequisite section. You have the audit checklist. We've gone over the when, how, why, what guidance expects to see and what documents come out of this, as well as what's in the deliverables for this webinar. We also talked about the changes to guidance in the last year and the AIO's impact on technology planning. So in this last section, I'm going to present the tactical plan alternatives spreadsheet for this year. And again, in the deliverables, we have the last 5 years of those as well. But going back to that audit checklist and the tactical plan alternatives I'm going to speak to next, really any kind of guidance. These documents help leave a paper trail. You want to have a paper trail that shows what you're doing, but also why you're not doing what you're not doing. These would serve as the basis, for your examiner or auditor to understand the process and start discussing it with you, if necessary. So this last section, the tactical plan alternative spreadsheet itself, the 2023 version. Well, the version created in 2022 for 2023. So that's, really what this is all about. As mentioned earlier, we have ideas come to us from all kinds of places throughout the year. How do we document those, sort them all out? The ideas management has had, things we've picked up from conferences and talks with other banks. How do we prioritize those and make a decision on what is going to be in our plan and what isn't? How do we lay that paper trail for this process for our auditors and stakeholders in these projects? But again, also for ourselves, what we chose to consider and what we didn't and why. So of course, that is the spreadsheet itself. So the tactical, analysis here is what the spreadsheet will become. But what it is right now is a spreadsheet of ideas, a number of employees at Infotex, from Dan as well. Some of the conferences she presented at, that we've gathered ideas from over the year, such as here's the takeaway, from this or that conference, the IBA security conference, technology forums, OBL events, from new guidance. Some older items that we still think you should be thinking about are in there. But most items in here are bottom-up ideas as talked about earlier. And what you're going to do is, take everyone's wish list, for technology, and then put it at the end of the spreadsheet, and fill out the columns for that item, which I'll go into here shortly. And again, we're not only trying to create a paper trail for the items in the plan, but for everything that was considered. And it will show, the reasons and decision-making process for items excluded from the plan. And we're, let's say we're halfway through the year, and a management team member comes up to and says we should, implement this new technology or process. And we can say, well, we actually considered that, and the reason we decided not to, we have a documented reason here, in the spreadsheet, in the notes section, it's something you could put there. But if it's a new idea, something we'd want to document as a future idea in the spreadsheet. And depending on urgency, bring it up in the next management team meeting, the next quarterly IT steering committee meeting, where technology plan is reviewed, or just wait until the next annual technology plan is created. But we use this document to collect all the ideas throughout the year, and again, turn that into the next tactical plan. But we're not bankers. We are auditors. But I just want to say everything in here, may not be that relevant to you. We try to pre-populate some good ideas. There are some things you should be considering. They may not be relevant to your particular infrastructure or hierarchy, or even your business or IT goals, but there are some, interesting ideas. So while I think that, there might be a few you might want to consider out of the pre-populated list we already have in there, probably not most of them, but they're interesting ideas, and, we included them for a reason. Even if it's just awareness of an idea that you may not have considered, or a risk that you're not seeing at your institution, but could be something you'll eventually, see or have to address down the road. So I think the awareness aspect of a lot of these items is pretty good. And, there really should be 2 iterations of this spreadsheet when you're done. But the idea is that you will end up with a second version of the spreadsheet that only include the items, you decided to implement in your technology plan, which would include the tactics in here, as the tactical plan itself. But as you can see, this will be the paper trail to meet guidance requirements. And I'll show the budget aspect here shortly. But this will also provide the paper trail for that. And as mentioned, there will be the final iteration, which will just be what will go into the next technology plan. But the other iteration will show what was considered and the basis for why things, did or didn't make it into the actual technology plan. So as mentioned, here it's called the column for the cost, or starting to think about the budget. And we really just encourage you to use a ballpark cost estimate here, but I'd go through these items, before you add your own into there, take out the items that would never work for you, or, maybe one of the ideas we had that sounded good to us, but again, as we're not a bank, may make no sense to you as a community-based bank, which does happen. But then I normally, once we have that whittled down to a handful of items that you should, possibly be considering, before putting in your own ideas, then ballpark the price. Do some Googling and think of the price as kind of a worst case scenario. So overprice a bit. You should easily be able to come up with a few different prices, take the highest one, with the understanding that if it's something we really should be implementing, we can look into the cost and probably beat what we've listed. But we really just, we don't want to be underestimating here, but apply some reasonableness to it. It has to be a price where, quality service or whatever can be delivered or implemented, but also a price that doesn't scare away management or eat too much of the budget. But again, you also get what you pay for. So, depending on what it's delivering, it could be worth the cost. But like almost everything, you can easily overcomplicate this. So within reason, overestimate a bit on some light research. We're not going to go out and spend time getting quotes unless we know it's actually going to be in the technology plan for that year. But cost is something you probably want to, be bringing up in those continuous meetings about technology planning. Sometimes there might be a case where something wasn't included based on its price, but halfway throughout the year, the price had significantly dropped, or, maybe, the vendor's offering it at a discount. So, budget's something that should be, constantly reassessed. And obviously that's why we want to be reviewing this, making sure it's up to date throughout the year, not to make a whole project of updating it. We do that once annually, but to consider what factors have changed, think and ask questions, does this still reflect what our priorities should be? And we have a few columns here towards the end. The 2016 movie goes into more detail about these. But what we're saying here is to use a scale of 1 to 5. 1 is high cost, 5 is low cost, benefit to the customer. If this was an internal item, the benefit to the institution, 1 to 3, this time with 3 being the high benefit. And then also a column for risk management, whether it reduces, does nothing, or increases overall risk, 0 to 2 there. And with these numbers, we can get some metrics that, provide insight into how to rank these items and what tactics to implement or not implement. But these are something that are going to have to be tweaked. Come up with your own ranking system. Change the scale if cost isn't as important to you. Make that 1 through 3. If the benefit or risk management is more important, maybe increase the scale there. Because, we're using these numbers to come up with a ranking system. The higher the number, the better. And the higher the number, the more, weight it has when adding all 3 together there. So prioritize this to your bank and then fill out, in the urgency there, something like low, medium, or high based on, adding those 3 columns up. But we want to provide a numbers-based approach for ranking these items. It's still all a bit subjective, but we want an objective numbers-based approach without overthinking it as well. A way to rank these items based on their cost, benefit, and risk, so that we can arrive at the items that we should be thinking about and possibly including in our presentation or in our technology plan. And as long as we're adding those items, especially items that management may have suggested over the year, again, this lays the paper trail showing that, we included management's input. So if you're just starting to use this spreadsheet or, one of your own, but just starting to document all of the items for possible inclusion into the technology plan, you're going to put that all on the bottom here, or in that spreadsheet. And, we'd, put in who brought it up, what the item is, maybe the CIO wanted us to implement Ice Cream Fridays, or maybe something more technology related, probably, whatever it is, and whoever it was, if it's something we hear or something someone brings to us, we want to document that, what it was, who brought it to our attention, and where it came from. And again, from an awareness perspective, it really never hurts to remind management or anybody going to those conferences, IT people, if they're going out there, talks, events, where they could get ideas from technology planning, to write those down and bring them to you. So again, really, we want to have 2 versions of this, one that'll be the final version and one that'll have the paper trail, as to, why we included what we did and what we didn't. And again, look through the old movies if you haven't looked at them before, and reach out to us if you have any questions. We'll try to answer those questions. It'll probably find its way to me. But I hope that showed you our overall approach to technology planning, what documents come out of it, how we're meeting guidance, prioritizing, using that tactical planning alternative spreadsheet. But Mike, that's what I had to present. I believe it's time for you to take over and finish this out. Thank you, everybody. Then if you have any feedback, we'd love to hear it.
I think that was great. And just the part with the spreadsheet with the budgeting, I mean, just having that, always having an idea of that I think is a great tip. But yeah, thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you, Adam, for the great presentation. And we will see you again at our next webinar. Really appreciate your time today, and make it a good one.
When you view an Infotex webinar or movie, you do so with 4 caveats. First, you are agreeing to the terms posted at the webpage listed on this slide. Second, our lawyers want you to know that what Infotex presents is often time-dated or about new trends, regulations, or guidance, and therefore we cannot provide this material with any warranty whatsoever. Thirdly, material provided with Infotex webinars and movies is copyrighted. You keep the copyright to material customized to your organization, but Infotex reserves the right to use the material in other engagements and boilerplates. See our Transfer of Copyright Agreement at the webpage listed in the slide. Finally, those who view our webinars or movies may be added to an email mailing list. If you do not wish to receive notice of additional educational opportunities, please accept our apologies and please opt out at the webpage shown on the slide.